I'm Leanne Beagley and I'm the CEO at the National Centre for Action on Child Sexual Abuse. The National Centre respectfully acknowledges and celebrates the many traditional owners of the lands throughout Australia and pay our respects to ancestors of this country and elders past and present. We recognise that Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander communities, culture and law have existed within Australia continuously for 65,000 years. We acknowledge the ongoing leadership of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander communities across Australia and those who have and continue to work tirelessly across inequities, inequalities, and to improve Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander justice outcomes for children and young people. The National Centre is committed to ensuring that the voices of those whose lives are affected by the decisions governments make should fundamentally inform those decisions. First Nations voices must be heard, raised and amplified through a voice to Parliament. It's time for genuine and significant reform to progress healing through the Uluru Statement of the Heart. We also want to honour the lived experience of all survivors of child sexual abuse, harnessing all ages, cultures, abilities and backgrounds, and commit to substantially addressing the harm of child sexual abuse now and well into the future. We recognise that there are children and young people today who are experiencing sexual abuse, and we dedicate ourselves to doing all we can to promote their effective protection and care. And we know that the people that are joining us today are also committed to this, and we welcome you and thank you for joining us. Just remind you that the session's recorded and that we're encouraging questions through the chat during the conversations, and we will get to them as we go, as many as we can. Also want to remind you that, you know, this is going to be a challenging conversation, and we encourage you to mind your own experience of what you're hearing today. The helpline info is available in the chat, and we just do encourage you to monitor your own experience of what you're hearing. Now, of course, we recognise that people may be new to the National Centre, and it's not a very old organisation, and we just want to remind you that the National Centre's a commitment through the Royal Commission into institutional responses to child sexual abuse, and that it was one of the recommendations, and it is about drawing together the threads of knowledge from victims and survivors and research knowledge, experience of practitioners and organisations, drawing together to learn together and to change and to create change in this country. But of course our remit is around child sexual abuse in all settings, so family, community, education and so on, not just restricted to institutional settings. So let me welcome our speakers today. I just want to start by thanking them for agreeing to do this conversation today with us, for the preparation they've done in their own thinking, and for the generosity that they're showing in joining us. It's a great honour and privilege for me to speak to both Paul and Cathy. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to introduce Paul and then Cathy, and then start a conversation. Paul Klotz is a former senior manager in the IT and telecom industry who experienced multiple mental and physical disabilities that led him to change his lifestyle 12 years ago. Paul advocates for others by using his lived experience and his living experience as a survivor of child sexual abuse, mental health and suicide, multiple cancer, heart and stroke conditions, as well as neurological and physical disabilities. He uses all of that to break down stigma and stereotyping and to raise awareness to facilitate sustainable change. Paul's involved in various community projects and serves as a director and treasurer for Phoenix House, a director of Your Best Life, Disability and Health Services, and a founding member of the National Centre's Adult-Led Survivor College. Paul, it's a great honour and privilege to have you here today. Thank you.
Thank you.
Dr. Cathy Kezelman is a medical practitioner. She's the president of the Blue Knot Foundation and has a lived experience of complex trauma. She's been a driving force within Blue Knot, previously ASCA for over 2 decades, and she's held a number of board and key representative roles within the mental health and related sectors. Cathy's the co-author of a range of seminal Blue Knot publications and guidelines. She's a prominent voice in the media and at conferences, and a national advocate for trauma-informed transformational changes and informed responsiveness to people experiencing the impacts of complex trauma. She's a board member of the National Centre for Action on Child Sexual Abuse, and in fact, she's the deputy chair. It's a great honour to have Cathy. Thank you for joining us, Cathy.
Thanks, Leanne.
Framing the discussion today, I really just want to remind us that what we're here to do is to talk about and explore together complex trauma and child sexual abuse through lived experience, the impacts across the life course, hope for healing and recovery, and a call to action. What do we need to do, and what does each person joining us today need to think about in terms of their approach to this really challenging but critically important area? So, Cathy, I'm going to start with you, and I'm just going to ask you, why have you come to having this conversation today?
Well, I suppose my own lived experience really upended my life. And when I started to deal with it in my mid-40s, it explained a lot about me, a lot about why I struggled in different ways. And I felt very privileged that I could get the support I needed over a long period of time to help me find my way through and help me find that life was absolutely worth living again, because there was a long period of time when, I really felt that it wasn't. And so my passion is to see that other people have opportunities to heal and recover, because we know that it's absolutely possible to heal and recover if you get the right supports at different times. And everyone's different, everyone's unique. And we all have different pathways. Whatever it is that someone needs at a point in time in their life, to have someone around them who they can trust, who they feel safe with, and who can walk alongside them, I think is absolutely critical.
Thanks, Cathy. What about you, Paul? What's brought you to having this conversation with us today?
Firstly, thank you so much for inviting me, and I really am humbled to be here. I'd like to start with a little saying that I read some time ago that sort of resonated with me as to part of my journey and why I'm here. I will tell you not what you want to hear, but what I know to be true, because I have lived it. The truth will trouble you, but in the end, you cannot be free without it. And that's by Arthur W. Frank, the Wounded Storyteller. And I read that some time ago, and it didn't make as much sense to me as it did until about 12 years ago. I lived in horrendous self-denial and shame and guilt and all of those things from the early childhood sexual abuse and all the journey that I went through. And it was an ugly journey in and out of mental health wards. 12 suicide attempts, the last one about 8 years ago, which is when my life started to turn around. And I was lying there going, you silly old fool, you failed again. Those terrible things that we say to ourselves. But my voices, my alters said to me, Paul, for a smart man, you're pretty bloody stupid. It's not your time to go. You've got something to do. You've got something to give. So for me, that was the light bulb moment where I said, okay, well, if I'm not in the departure lounge yet, then I got to find out what I have to do. So for me, it was about understanding my journey first, but then working out how I can actually help other people. And one of my mantras is to make a difference in people's lives. And for me, it's about shortening the disclosure curve, shortening the time that people do access the support that they need, because it is a prominent problem out there. We're becoming more aware of it now. So I try and do whatever I can to raise the awareness, to kick down the doors and just let people know that it's not okay, but it is okay to reach out for help. So that's, the shorter version as I can why I'm here is to just continue to raise the awareness and to tell people it's okay to reach out and not be okay.
Well, thank you. And I noticed when Cathy talked about grappling with the issues in her 40s, and you talked about them more recently yourself, that really you're both talking about carrying a lot of trouble over a long period of time before you were able to start to think it through. Can you tell me a bit more, Paul, about that? So, you know, this issue about shortening the time between disclosure that you just brought up before. Can you talk a bit more about how long it took you and why complex trauma is like that?
The simplest way for me to describe it is I sort of, when I started to do the reflective process, I broke it down into my life journey, but into time slots. So up until the age of 11, I was just a normal kid running around the bush, riding my horse, having a great time until I went to boarding school. And then for 2 or 3 years, I went through excessive sexual abuse. I then entered what I call the lost years, which basically went from about 13 to probably 23, which is where I was just completely lost. The shame, the guilt, the embarrassment. And we have to understand, you know, back in those days, the Catholic Church was on a pedestal. So I had tried to talk to a more senior brother about the abuse, but I got slapped down, and then later he started to abuse me. So trust was not there. I felt that there was nowhere to go. So that then led me into my years of self-denial, where that was part of my coping mechanism, was to just say it didn't occur. Which was, you know, even though I was functioning in the corporate world and ended up being married and having 4 beautiful boys, I was still addicted to hard drugs and excessive alcohol, because that was the way that I could, or that I coped with it, because I really didn't understand everything that had happened, everything that was occurring. And when I did reach out for help and support, I was slapped down. So that period of, from the abuse of 13 to when I finally was able to start to get help, was when I was around about 50. So there's, you know, 37 years of darkness that's there. That is too long for anyone. There's 37 years of the society not really understanding or acknowledging or having the capacity. We've still got a long way to go in terms of mental health and physical health support out there, but it was basically non-existent back then. So we were the forgotten ones, the invisible ones, and we had the fear of threat to be quiet. So all of that's changing now through the Royal Commission. All of that's changing through amazing people like Cathy here with her organisations and all the other organisations out there raising the awareness. What we need to do now is to support those ones that unfortunately may be still suffering, to actually know that they can come forward, that there is a safe place, there are safe people for them to talk to. So it is an ugly long period for people to have to deal with, and it's not right. We shouldn't have to be alone, to be in the darkness like that.
That's right. Cathy, is that something that is an unusual story, or a story that you're very familiar with in terms of complex trauma and late acknowledgement and engagement with?
The Royal Commission found that it takes on average 25 or so years for people to come forward. I mean, my experience was very different. So what I did, I mean, I was sexually and emotionally abused as a young child, and I suspect between the ages of 4, 14, something like that. And what I did was lock it off altogether. So I dissociated, I split off the memory, and I continued to function apparently well. But in retrospect, I functioned a bit like a robot, because to keep all of that out of my consciousness, I had to lock it away. And I know people sort of really question the whole issue of dissociative amnesia and, you know, recovered memories. But when you think about it, when a child has experienced unspeakable, repeated trauma, it's actually ingenious that the brain can actually lock that away and cut it up into bite-sized chunks so it doesn't overwhelm the brain. And that's what happened to me. So I didn't remember my story till my mid-40s. And it started with the death of a close relative, and that was the trigger that started me unraveling. But it didn't mean it hadn't tainted
Hmm.
a lot of my life. I was the incredibly good child at school. Never a peep out of me. I was terrified to speak, even in private, to anyone. And I was really shut off emotionally, and for my family, obviously, that was not terrific. But I functioned, and for the outside world who's not very informed, seeing a good child and someone who does well at school, and everything looks hunky dory, but it was a emotional desert that I grew up in. And so I suppose, Paul's story is very different, and there are so many different stories, but to not start to deal with something till mid to later life is very, very usual for people with complex trauma related to child sexual abuse. And I suppose part of what hopefully we'll do is, give permission for others to come forward earlier and get that help earlier, as Paul said, because the sooner you get the help, the sooner you can start to begin to live the life that maybe was the one you could have lived in the first place.
I wonder, we will get to talking about, well, what does help look like when you come forward for support, and do you always get it, is the question. But I just wonder if you could talk, and I'll come to Paul as well, and just talk to people who are online about what complex trauma can look like. And, so you've said a little bit about that. What are some of the things that because you've said, for example, you're a really good girl, and it might have been hard for people to pick that there was a problem. So can you tell us a bit more about complex trauma?
Yeah, complex trauma, refers to the experience and the impact of the experience of repeated experiences, repeated adverse experience, and that sounds like a minimizing term. I don't particularly like that. Repeated, violence, abuse, neglect as a child, not always as a child, can happen right across the lifespan, and often is cumulative and compounded over the lifespan, but also can be associated with other dynamics, for example, where there's a caregiver who just can't connect or attach to the child. The child is not getting a consistent response. Groups who are marginalised or oppressed or ostracised. Unfortunately, there's a whole sort of complex pattern of ways in which people can, experience multiple, not just overt abuses, but it's also what people don't receive. And so at a time that a child, I'll talk about childhood trauma, is learning about the world and learning what it is to be safe and to trust, and so that you can go out and explore. If you're living in a world of danger, you don't actually learn that at all. And so, the formation of your sense of self and your self-worth and your identity and your ability to have relationships, not just then, but through life, really gets upended.
Yeah.
And, I suppose, the positive news is that, over time, as you learn perhaps who you can trust around you, just putting your toe in the water with the first person, and you can start to rewrite the script that you have in your head, which is that the world is dangerous and the people are dangerous, and the only person you can trust is yourself.
Yeah.
And that's certainly what I grew up with, and a lot of other survivors grew up with. So it can change.
Is that familiar, Paul? Are there echoes in what Cathy's saying about your own experience of that time when I think you talked about just being in a world of pain in relation to drug use and other sorts of challenges while you were after you in your mid-20s onwards? Are there echoes what Cathy said in your experience?
Yeah, absolutely. But as Cathy rightly said, every person's journey is going to be different. There's going to be some commonalities there, but it's how we respond to it. Complex trauma for me is still an evolving journey for me. There are still disclosures that my self-denial had locked away for so long. Some of the perpetrators are now only becoming known to me in a conscious manner as I become stronger and more confident to be able to deal with those things. So for me, it was, whilst I tried to disclose early and got shut down, that self-denial was basically my disassociation, my mind starting to fragment. And therefore what I did is I put up this incredible facade, which everyone saw, that I was a very successful sports person when I was younger. I still able to manage a very good career, because that was the facade that people saw. What was inside was this broken person. I often use the phrase, will the real Paul Klotz please stand up? Because I'm now aware that there's 6 or 7 different alters that have existed that I didn't really understand or know, that have kept me alive. They've caused a lot of damage as well along the way, but that's part of the mental demons that we go through. So for me, the whole journey of complex trauma and where it leads to is really not knowing what your future looks like, what your future self looks like, as opposed to what your real self is. Once you understand who the real Paul is, it's then trying to define what that future looks like. So there's all that turmoil that's flowing through. Trust, as Cathy said, is just an incredible thing. It's I'm always looking for the red herring, but on the same token, it's a little bit two-sided, that I don't trust anyone, and it takes me a long time to do that, but I'm also over trusting. So I just give and give and give and give, and then you get taken advantage of. So it's this yin and the yang that just is exhausting and fatiguing from a mental and physical perspective. There's hypervigilance that you're continually on alert and tense, which leads to muscular things. And I'm a great believer that a lot of my physical ailments, from the heart attack and the ongoing cardio issues, to the stroke, to the losing my bowel, to the 3 different types of cancer, but cancer 4 times, etc., have all come from that complex trauma hotspot that has just been festering away inside because it had nowhere to go, it had nowhere to understand. The brain and the gut work exceptionally well to protect you, but at some point there's a breaking point, and part of that then flows into sleep. I mean, I'm happy if I get 3 hours sleep a night, but that sleep is always broken, with obstructive sleep apnea. But the flashbacks, the weird nightmares where my fragmented mind brings people and parts of my life together into the one scene, which makes no sense, and it haunts and taunts me. And sometimes I wake up feeling absolutely fantastic, but then I realize it's not real, Paul. So there's this constant battle. So even when you do sleep, it's not good sleep. I mean, the disassociation, and so you're continually battling all these things. And we don't like, or people don't like to hear these things, but we do feel, I'll not say we, I do not like myself. I feel ugly. I feel hopeless. I battle with suicide ideation all the time. I just get emotional, but that's okay, because that's what this is about. But I'm stronger now, because I've understood all of the diagnosis from the mental health side, and that's helped me understand why I did the things that I did, why things occurred. And it's allowed me to garner those voices and alters to actually be stronger, to be braver, to have this voice. I mean, I couldn't have done this 3 years ago. It still hurts, but sorry. It's okay to cry, because we need to cry. People need to see the damage that is done, but there is hope at the end of the line. But it's about making sure people do call out, reach out, and that we have the right, and I know we'll come to it, but having the right support structures, the right services, and the right people in terms of education and awareness that take that holistic approach and don't look at it from, oh, it's a mental health issue. Yes, it might be, but there's emotional factors, there's physical factors, there's social factors, there's spiritual factors, there's financial factors. Having that holistic approach that allows that person to find that stable ground to be able to re-establish themselves, find the real person, and then start to work out what the future looks like. And I'm back in control again, which is good. Anyway, yeah.
I was going to ask you, and thank you for your emotion and your sharing. in that time before you got to needing to think about who, you know, will the real Paul stand up, and that kind of threshold when you really had to grapple with what was going on, in that time while you were at sea, could there have been things that people did that might have made it easier for you during that time, either to engage or to bring that kind of reckoning earlier? What could people have done?
Look, from my very simple perspective, I mean, and it's not laying blame, but yeah, there are checkpoints that we all go through life. So if I just focus on the medical aspect, surely the hospital system, the health system, the doctors out there should have recognized, why is this individual going through so much physical trauma? There is something. That's the behavior. It's the way our brain works. We focus on the behavior as opposed to acknowledging the behavior and then working backwards. What's the emotions? What's the thoughts? Therefore, what was the trigger that started that whole process to go through? So for me, if, you know, the health system had sort of said, why is Paul getting cancer all the time? Why is, as a young man, is he having a heart attack? Why has he had a stroke? Why has he got all of these, you know, bowel issues, you know, diverticulitis, IBS, leading to perforated bowel, to losing most of the bowel? Why is he getting glandular fever? Why is he getting pneumonia all the time? You know, they're warning signs to say that the body and the mind aren't working well together. So therefore, that should be an obvious alert to say, we need to talk more. Why is Paul, and yeah, I won't go into all the details, why is Paul doing really dumb things all the time? You know, I'm not proud of it, but you know, in the early days, why did I have 3 drink driving charges? Because I was lost. I was on a self-destructive path. There are obvious signs out there that either family, friends, or the professional side should be picking up. We are getting better at it now. We are talking, like, to me, this is so important, is having this conversation, because it's normalizing it. We wouldn't talk about childhood sex abuse or mental health or suicide before, because it was the unknown. We don't talk about that, you know, a bit like the British, all those, we don't talk about the war type thing. Yeah, we just don't want to address those things. So, but we've still got a long way to go.
Well, I agree, but I'd be really interested in Cathy's view, just as a medical practitioner. You know, what do you make of what Paul's saying in terms of, you know, people being able to stand back and pick up a range of things and raise them with somebody?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely, but I suppose it just hasn't been on the radar.
That's right.
And as a medical practitioner, I mean, certainly my own experience, I was working in a full-person practice when I had a breakdown. And, you know, with a decent group of people who ran a mile because they didn't know what was, you know, I was falling off my twig and they couldn't relate to me, but they didn't say what's actually happened to you to have affected you so profoundly that someone who was apparently highly functioning and could do everything with apparent ease was unable to get out of bed for 2 years. And they bolted. Now, that's not their fault, but, you know, it shows that the training, and that was a while back, but I'm not sure that it's dramatically better now, to actually beyond the symptom, look beyond the behavior and say, what's this behavior telling you?
Yeah.
What perhaps do you need to think about? And particularly someone with, you know, Paul's story of recurrent physical health presentations. I mean, we know that, you know, just living in a state of high alert with a stress system that's on overdrive, a nervous system that's dysregulated, you know, does crazy things to the regulation of your immune system, to your hormonal systems, and you know, that has an effect. Because when things are permanently on overdrive, it's like a car. You know, if the car is not tuned properly, it wears itself out.
It does.
And what we know is that, you know, unfortunately, many people who've experienced complex trauma do have all sorts of physical health issues, as well as mental health challenges, as well as relationship challenges. And so if we can actually educate practitioners, not just medical practitioners, but from multiple services, just to think about, what could this be saying? Just look beyond the, the label that you get on your head that sends you down a direction, but doesn't ask the other questions about, this is a human being in front of me, and what's the flow here? What's the story? What am I missing?
Do you remember the first people that began to do that? Do you remember a time when you reached out for support and the response was enabling?
For me?
Yes.
Okay. I was lucky that I reached out to a therapist who was someone I'd referred to, who was just there, just very patiently there, because even though she was very patiently there in as relatively unconditional way as one can do, it took me years to trust her. It took me years to feel safe. And it took me years to actually get to what was going on for me, because at that time I was having panic attacks and a lot of anxiety. I was profoundly depressed. I was suicidal. And I didn't know what the hell was going on. And then I started to get flashbacks, as Paul was just talking about, which were, for people who don't understand flashbacks, what this is just fragments of your experiences coming back, and you relive them. And you relive them in full technicolor.
Yes.
Full experience. And it's terrifying because you're reliving it with the emotions. Now, as a medical practitioner, I had no idea what that was. So my training hadn't prepared me for it. I thought I was losing my mind. But I had a therapist who was able to hold me and just be with me, and, until we were able to actually examine what was happening and what was, coming into the room. Because after a while, what would happen is, because I was learning to trust her, I would be dissociating and reliving fragments in her room, not because of anything she'd done, any technique, but because I now had a safe space. And then we'd talk about whatever that was at the end of the session. But, that was a terrifying period of time, because I didn't know what on earth was going on there. Like Paul, I had different parts of myself coming forward. And sometimes I had a marketplace in my head of people, voices talking to one another, just crazy stuff. And I was so fragmented and compartmentalized, in retrospect, I'd say crazy things to her like, if you like this part of me so much, you keep them over the weekend. And that's how separate it felt. Yeah. That's and it's, unless you experience that, it sounds mad.
Yeah.
But it's not. It's real.
We've all got parts of ourselves.
Hmm.
And if you don't want to be overwhelmed and drown in this stuff, then keep them separate. Makes sense. Yes. And that's what dissociation does.
And it's incredibly protective in its own way, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, totally.
Well, was this, can you recall when you started to have someone understand or engage with you in your pain?
This is going to be hard, because no. The simple answer is no. There are people who have been there that I've been able to take snippets, and I do count Cathy as one of those, because her story was so strong for me, and it gave me the strength to keep going. But my lack of trust, my inability to build relationships makes it hard to actually just open your arms and say yes. Yeah. Part of it is with complex trauma and childhood sexual abuses, there is this damaged, broken little person inside who is screaming for help. And he wants to help, in my case, but he's so terrified, because every time that he gets close, I have tried to disclose to key people in my life over the years, and I've just been told, no, it's not the right time. No, I can't deal with that. So I was like, oh, okay, sorry. So for me to be honestly blunt, no, there isn't anyone that had, but there's been just 2 or 3 key people that thank you, have arrived at the right time and have listened, which is the key aspect of listened, and to use their words, we see things in you, Paul, that you probably don't see. And that was such an incredible, if you like, lifeline for me to hang on to and go, okay, maybe there is something inside this broken old fool here that is worthwhile fighting for. But that's part of the discussion, that's part of the journey. And it took, as I said, unfortunately, it took until my 12th attempt to have that hard conversation to say, there's obviously more that you've got to do. You're not, it's not your flight that's been called, get out of the departure lounge. And that's what has driven me. For me, the most cathartic part, which is wrong, but it's right, is that I actually get the most strength from helping other people. As Cathy would probably say, I am hopeless at helping myself, but I do need to find someone, you know, that I can lean on, but have that total trust. Because for me, it's about finding that safe person and that safe place. And it can be in a clinical setting, but hopefully it's in a more social setting that allows me to be me and not feel ashamed, not be embarrassed, not to have all that emotions and feelings that are continually battering away at you. But as I said, the outside world doesn't see that, because unfortunately, I'm the master of the facade. People see the, you know, the confident, the strong, the big burly bear, but they don't see the broken one inside. And it's good to be able to talk like this, because, as I said, it's about normalizing these conversations, because as more people hear these things, the more chance that others that are feeling like that will actually go, hey, maybe I can go and talk to someone. Maybe I can change and you know, turn my life around and lead the life that we all deserve. We deserve to have a contented life.
No, they're absolutely right. And it seems to me that there's something about people staying with you and staying connected in the way Cathy spoke about, holding a space or staying connected, that allows some healing to happen. So, or at least some trust to happen. And that's you know, we've got people online today perhaps who have their own stories, or who are working in the space as practitioners. And, you know, there's a strong message there about staying with people, walking alongside people and staying with people at their own pace.
Could I also just add to, Leanne, that it's as much about, and it's a harsh word, but it's a real word, not being judgmental. 99% of the time, we just need someone to listen. I mean, the amount of times that I've been to helplines, and it's not that they're being judgmental, but they've already put me into a box. Oh, you've said that you're feeling suicidal. So next thing you know, I've got the ambulance and the police at my doorstep. No, go away. I just needed someone to talk to. I don't want answers, because I don't know what the answers are yet. I just needed someone to talk to. So there's a lot of that people can learn from, to say, hey, so-and-so's feeling down, just give your shoulder. You got two of these, use them, just listen, because 9 times out of 10, that's all I ever want, is just someone to talk to.
Yeah, and often people don't know what to say. And the best thing you can do is say, I don't know what to say, but I'm here.
Yeah.
I had one very special friend who saw through everything that was going on, because I was also pretty good at the facade till I totally fell apart. And she just used to come over, pull me out when I couldn't actually, you know, get out of bed.
Mm.
And she brought me jelly babies. And jelly babies were, you know, really very therapeutic. They really have a healing power. But it's just that simple. It doesn't have to, they don't try and fix it or tell you solutions or tell you about someone else's, you know, just be there, as you say, listen, or even be there in silence. Just show that you're not running a mile, because often as human beings, when we don't know how to help someone and it's too confronting, we leave, you know, instead of, this is the time when people need other people most.
Yes. Yeah. It's one of the things that has come through our training needs development survey that the National Centre has done, is that there's a high overlap between people who are helping and there to help as practitioners, and people who might themselves experience some kind of trauma, including child sexual abuse. And I guess that might be the case for people online today. So what are some of the challenges from your point of view, Cathy, in both those spaces, and then Paul, as a colleague, peer and friend, what are some of the challenges of carrying both those, the helping and the history at the same time?
Yeah, well, I think the first thing is something that Paul said, is that, often survivors, and myself included, are much better at supporting and helping others than supporting and helping yourself, because you often don't think that you're worthy of that, and you actually find it very difficult to do. And many people, I think, who go into the helping professions are there, partly for that reason, and partly try and work their own stuff out. I think by being close to it, that gives you an opportunity. So challenges, I think there's pluses, there's challenges and benefits as well. There's, because you have the lived and living experience, you bring that with you with every fibre of your being. And, I was involved in a committee the other day, lived and living experience committee, and just watching people come together almost without words, because that facade didn't have to be there, because there's a commonality. Everyone's had a different experience, and it's a very diverse group, but yet there's a commonality. You don't have to pretend. You don't have to have the false face on. And so, I think that's a plus. But, certainly for myself, working as I do in this area, it can be hard to know which hat I have on. But that's not necessarily a problem, because maybe the hat needs to be merged anyway, and maybe a merged hat would be much better informed, because it's informed by the reality of what you live through.
Yes, indeed.
Yeah.
You have thoughts about that, Paul, about the people who might have, who are living with their own story and their own history, but also wanting to be helpers? Are there challenges for you in that?
Categorically, you're walking along looking at yourself in the mirror a lot of the time when you're helping other people. For me, I struggle at times, but I also use it as a very strong reflective tool. I actually find it very cathartic for me to say, because as Cathy said, I am the ultimate empath. My emotional intelligence and empathy, which was a great revelation for me, because as I said, I have a very high IQ, but for most of my life, my EQ was not there because it had been destroyed. So for me, being able to release that empath has allowed me to be a stronger person for other people. But it's, as I said, it's that reflective process that I go through and say, okay, you're talking to this person, you're challenging them as to why they're prepared to say or do the things that they do about themselves, and you don't like that. Why are you prepared to do it to yourself, Paul? So I use it to challenge myself. So the challenge is to be able to do that in a safe way and a safe place, because it can be very overwhelming. And as I said, for me, when I live with suicide ideation every single day, and I go through the 4 questions, and I really am very close to answering that 4th question. Yes, I'm going to carry it out. So it's about having those right things. And I use a few different things. I call it I got to remember what time of the day it is, my oh shite box, which is just my way of being able to bring myself back in. So I have a bucket of sand with some shells in it, and I have a packet of mustics. Cathy's was jelly babies, mine was mustics. So I just use the 6 senses that we have to as one of my safety lines when I'm struggling. It doesn't always work, but there's, everyone's going to have different types of tools. But for me, it is actually part of my recovery process. It's part of that, being able to be reflective, and it's actually allowed me it's allowed my brain just to continue to unpack. And as I said, there are more parts of that abuse that I've started to unpack, which is horrendous to think. I thought that was bad enough, but bloody hell, my mind is now starting to unrelease all of these other bad aspects, which again is probably a safety thing, because if it had all hit at once, then I definitely probably wouldn't have made it through. So it's probably regulating when and how it does do that. But I do believe that I still have a lot to learn in terms of how do I managers. And I think as a community, we need to become a little bit more informed. How do we develop a more trauma-informed community? And it's a wonderful buzzword, and I'm still trying to get the right definition in my own head. But as I've always said, we're all accountable for this. We're all responsible for this in some form, whether you're seeing someone that's going through a hard time. We don't know what is happening in their life. So we do have some responsibility to be able to just put our arms out and say, are you all right, champ? Yeah, do you want to have a chat? Do you want to go and, you know, sit by the creek and have a chat? Just being there for people, which as we first started off 30, 40 years ago, that wasn't there. And especially for males. Yeah, we've come a long way in terms of getting males to actually open up. And when males get knocked back, we go further into the cave. So there's still a lot to be learned from that side of it.
Absolutely. That's actually what I was going to ask you. You've said a couple of times. Well, you've said a couple of times about it's easier to talk about it now, or perhaps we do talk about it more now, and I wonder about that. Have we gone far enough?
No, I mean, we still struggle with the whole archetype of the Australian male. You know, big boys don't cry, get over it, sunshine. You know, Uncle Chopper Reed said, put some concrete in those veins type approach. And yeah, because the male has always been the hunter, and that's their expectation. And we're supposed to be the strong one. We're not supposed to show emotions. We're supposed to solve things. And my oldest son Damon was part of a group that he founded a men's group God, probably 12, 13 years ago, and they took the reverse approach. Rather than harden their organization was soften the blah 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 up, because it was basically, the message was, it's okay for males to be soft, it's okay for males to cry, it's okay for males to express themselves. But it's still I wouldn't say not acceptable, but it still makes people feel uncomfortable when a male starts to cry. I mean, if I walked to the pub and put my arms around a mate and sort of said, yeah, and started to cry, I said, oh, it's like, whoa, what are you doing, buddy? This is embarrassing. But for two girlfriends to do it, we see that as a normal thing. So there's still a lot of mindset that we need to influence and improve to make it acceptable for males to express themselves. And that's just my opinion. That's just how I see it.
That's what we're hearing today, Paul. We want to listen to your opinion. That's what we're doing. What do you think about that, Cathy? How because that's a conversation about shame, isn't it? It's about overcoming shame in order to share what's going on in your pain. What's your thoughts about that?
Well, it's about overcoming shame, but it's also about overcoming stigma in the community. So, you know, there's two sides of the coin. And the shame that survivors, many survivors take on, is withering. You know, it's an extreme shame, and that is because, you know, as a child, if you're being abused and violated by the very people who are meant to care for you and nurture you, what sense can you make of that other than you're doing something wrong and you're to blame? And so that is very, very deep-seated. And then when we have a society that, you know, turns their back on something that's very discomforting for them, and what I often say is, well, yes, it's discomforting for you, but, you know, live through the process and see how discomforting, you know. And I understand, you know, why people do that. We all defend against things that are just, you know, way too challenging to process. And we all like to think that all families are hunky-dory and, you know, look after kids well, and, you know, kids grow up and they, you know, have a great life, and, you know, kids go online and they play games, and that's fantastic. And, you know, but unfortunately the reality is quite different for some kids. But, you know, what I struggle with is that, you know, despite what we know about how damn common this is, how many people it affects, and the fact that everyone must know someone who's experienced child sexual abuse, even if they haven't acknowledged it. Why? What's with the pretense? You know, why isn't there a much more active discourse? You know, yes, we have shifted. Has it gone far enough? No. You know, it needs to go a lot further. And we need to have way more educational conversations to build awareness, way more that are not sensationalist reporting and celebrity focused, but let's talk realistically about the community and just what happens and what we can do as other human beings, because this is the human condition. We can all be vulnerable, and there, but for the grace of God, go I.
Do you I'll stay on you, Cathy, but come back to Paul. Do you have advice for those online? And sometimes we start online with a number of people and they drop off over time. Let me tell you, no one's dropping off today. This is a really important conversation. People are listening and, have questions about, these traumatic experiences and about having the conversation and kind of normalizing the conversation, if you like. What do you think? What's your call to action for the people who are listening today, and also for the National Centre, about, creating a context where we can have those kind of conversations a bit more reliably in the community?
I think we keep providing the information. I think we keep talking about it. The more we talk about it in a real way and an honest way, but a way that also engenders, the real hope for possibility that things can be different, and build the capacity of the community, of families, of the service sector, of systems, to actually respond in a way that as human beings we all want to be responded to. But particularly if we see someone who may be triggered or struggling in a particular way, and understanding that they have a very good reason, which they may not be able to articulate, but within their physiology as to why they're reacting like that way. So how can we lift our level of sensitivity to actually understand how we can be there, and as Paul said, to hear, to listen, to believe. What is it that you need now? I'm here. How can I help? It shouldn't be that hard.
Well, it in a way it doesn't sound that hard, does it? But these are awful things that have happened to you both and to the people that are others that may be listening today. And we know that the prevalence is much higher than we previously knew about. We know that the prevalence of child sexual abuse is occurring in about 28% of the community, which is really challenging, very high number. So, Paul, are there other things that might support having these conversations and dealing with the stigma from your point of view?
I won't get on my political soapbox from a society perspective, because I think there's a lot that society can do. But from a personal perspective, it's about keeping our headlights on, keeping our radar alert to what's happening around us. I mean, one of the things that I continue to have in my mind is the pebble in the pond. Yeah, if I can just help one person, if I can just notice one thing, if I can just be there for one person, that has an impact, because that person then feels safer, stronger, allows them to deal with their things, which they then hopefully will then pay that forward. So it comes back to that community thing. We don't have the time to to go through all of the concerns out there. I mean, the kids today are struggling with the social media and what technology does provide. There are so many channels there, and there's a lot that can be done. But as I said, I won't get onto that political soapbox. But it's about just challenging each person out there to say, have you got your headlights on? Are you actually keeping your ears and eyes alert for those around you to see what you could possibly do? Because that's all it takes, is just one person to tap you on the shoulder and say, hey, just notice a change. I'm here if you want to talk. Don't say you have to talk, but just saying I'm here, because it's that safe place, it's that safe person. And over time they will go, you know what, I actually do feel safe with that person, and they then may reach out. But it's just letting them know that safety net is there for them when they are ready to engage. And that's something that we can all do now. We're not talking about a major society change. It's just an accountability that each of us can take on board.
I suppose the other element to that is that, you know, many survivors have struggled for years and not felt safe. And so it's understanding how long it can take for someone to reach out, for someone to trust you and to hang on in there. It doesn't mean, you know, don't take it personally, because that makes sense. You know, when they've been so profoundly betrayed and have lived, you know, years in danger, waiting for the next assault, it makes total sense for them. So how can we be patient with one another? You know, stop judging, stop being being punitive, but understand and accept people in the way they are.
And I think we do understand, don't we, now? We're learning more about how disclosures and learning about what's happened is an unfolding process rather than a kind of, you know, always a disclosure that says these are all the things that have happened to me, that potentially people might share a little bit of their story as they go, which you've both actually talked about.
Yeah, and the first response to that is critical, because if someone puts a toe in the water, just testing the waters, and they get a response which is, you know, aversive, they're going to go underground for a long time.
Yep.
Yeah.
So what is the first response, Cathy, that you'd recommend?
It's what we've said before. Thank you for telling me, you know, that's, you know, I'm here. Tell me as little or as much as you want. I'm listening. You know, how can I support you further? Is there anyone else you want me to contact? What do you need?
I take the same approach. I just use a couple of extra words that I normally say. Thank you for trusting me.
Yeah.
That is a big step, and I feel very honoured. And I say this, you know, most genuinely feel honoured that you feel that you can trust me, because that then just it's affirmation back to that person to go, okay, they get me.
Yeah.
They've not judged me. They haven't said anything. Thank you for trusting me. And hey, I'm just here. You just want to sit and talk?
Yeah.
Talk. Yeah. If you want to come back later, that's okay. Because it's that first step for the survivor, for the victim to reach out. And if it's a bad experience, as Cathy said, and as I said, yeah, I would go further into my deep, dark cave to hide, because it's not safe to come out again. So it's just that acknowledgement and thanking them for having the strength and for trusting me.
Yeah. And I believe you, maybe not as overtly in the I believe words, but show that you believe what they're saying. Yes. Show you're not questioning it at all.
It is important to be believed.
I mean, that's the hardest thing. And, you know, in my journey, I've, you know, been negated a number of times. And as a survivor, you know, having to prove your victimhood is just a whole new level. You know, here you are, you know, fighting with the impacts of things that happened to you through, you know, through no fault of your own as a, you know, really young child, and yet someone's actually questioning that. That is off the scale for a survivor. Yeah.
There aren't words to describe it.
Yeah. And are there experiences, and I hear what you're saying about that, because there's something very powerful about just being heard and being believed. What about when there's, you know, so you said you didn't want to be political, Paul, I get that. But, you know, where there's media, there's communications out there about, and there's people who have things to say about this area in the wider community as we become more comfortable, I guess, as a community to talk about it. Is it hard for you to see those things? Is it hard to hear about, you know, in the news, in the media? Are there ways that we could be doing that better?
Yeah, I mean, I'll be a little contentious. coming from a technology background, I do understand technology, reasonably well. And it comes back to, and I'm old school, so my values are going to be very different in terms of it. But I'm just dumbstruck and shocked and disgusted with the amount of soft porn that's on social media, whether it's Facebook, Instagram, To me, I just don't get it, what the need is for it. It's exposed, and all of our kids from, I know of kids that are 2 and 3 years old that have iPhones and all the rest, and are, openly exposed to this stuff. That is not, and again, this is just my Cyclops view. That is just encouraging problems further down the track. We're not teaching kids about respect. We're not teaching kids about, safe zones, what's right, what's wrong. There are simple things that the telecommunications, the governments could do to actually manage and control that in terms of what is acceptable to go on there. We're having, music and stuff being asked to be rewritten out there, but yet we've got songs out there that just demonize the female body. As I said, I don't want to be political, but I just don't get where on one hand we say we don't want child sex abuse out there, but it's being thrust in the face of our kids on a regular basis in so many formats. For me, it's a fairly probably draconian but simple approach, is that we need tighter controls on what our kids can see and hear.
Thanks, Paul. Cathy, you look like you have something you want to add to that.
Yeah, I mean, I think, unfortunately, there's always a few sides to what we see in media and social media, and particularly now there's a lot of opinion, and it always fascinates me that, how people jump onto the bandwagon when they actually have no direct understanding of what's actually happened. But you get this sort of herd mentality, which is fueled by ignorance. Which actually, for a survivor who's been courageous to come forward, who is then trolled with a whole set of God knows what by people hiding behind their anonymity and jumping on just a part of a collective uninformed voice, is just profoundly damaging. And I agree with Paul, there's all sorts of controls we need, because some media is, highly responsible, and, we know that they're going to tell a story that informs and educates. Others are just there to be controversial and sensationalist and outrageous, and and social media is a whole other platform, completely dysregulated, which is interesting.
Thank you. And we did speak quite a bit about this actually at the last webinar, which I'm going to encourage people to have a look at, with Paul Rouse, who'd been policing in this space. I'm just noticing the time, and I'm noticing that we've navigated quite a lot from tears to laughter, and I'm just recognizing also that we're bringing this time to an end. And I just wondered if each of you might think about what you most want people to take away from this conversation. What do you most want to say to people about your experience, and how they might hear that and what might help them in both their journey or their work? That would be fantastic. Perhaps starting with you, Cathy.
So my experience was one that I didn't recall for many, many years. And I suppose what it meant for me was that I, had a pretty tough wake-up call that, cut me down for, a good 10, 15 years. I lost 10, 15 years of my life just in the recovery. And at the time in that process, I was completely non-functional and had many, many mental health diagnoses. But that as I went through a process whereby I made sense of my trauma, the parts that I was ashamed of, wanted to get rid of, suicidal, somehow I embraced them. The other parts that were, young and vulnerable, joined in. And so, this sort of very fragmented self-destructive person with no sense of self. Hopefully has evolved somewhat, and I'm not saying I'm done. So my message is that you can come from the depths of despair and holding on to hope by a thread, and someone else was holding that thread, to actually finding a life that's, full and rich and connected. You can reclaim your empathy and your emotional side. Not saying it's all fantastic, none of that, but hope and healing. And we know from the neuroscience, the brain does, new pathways can be laid down. So it's not just Pollyanna or anecdotal, it's real. So hang on in there, that's what I'm saying. And, at times you can't see the help that's there, but there will be someone there who you can reach out to and who can just be there to help hold you, metaphorically, until you can find a bit of a path.
Thank you, Cathy. Oh.
For me, it's I suppose what I'd like people to take away is that from a personal perspective, it's about acknowledging inside what has occurred. It took a long time for me to acknowledge it, to accept it. So being able to acknowledge, not necessarily accept, just acknowledge the abuse, the trauma path and its impacts. And, as Cathy alluded to, part of that for me was understanding the diagnosis, not from a label perspective, but it helped me actually understand what I had done or what I was doing or what I'd said. So it helped me make a little bit of sense of the past reactions to the abuse. So part of it is to embrace that acknowledgement and go on that journey. It's going to be tough. It's going to be very tough. It's a bit like if you open the door, you can't shut the door again. So, hopefully you've got a safe person that can walk beside you on that journey. But it's a bit like AA. Until you acknowledge you're an alcoholic, nothing's ever going to change. So part of the recovery process is you personally just being able to acknowledge that and then use that in a reflective way to actually learn what are the things that worked for you, what are the things that weren't working for you. And as Cathy said, if we could take some of those evil critters out of our head and say, I don't need you, but I want you guys, you can stay, but the rest of you out of the pool, going through that process, because you will then find a small little orb of inner peace, which you can then start to build on. And it's about working out what those areas of strength are. As I said, it's taken me a long time, and part of it is that I'm confident that I can talk with a voice now, and I have the strength to do it, not just for myself, but hopefully for other people that don't have the capacity or the strength, but maybe feel encouraged that, they might not be able to do it directly, but indirectly it's going to occur. And just accepting that the road ahead is going to have a lot of potholes and a lot of detours and a few dead ends. But as long as you can just work out what that hope looks like. And for me, it was defining what that purpose is. If I'm going to get out of bed, then I got to have a purpose. So acknowledgement, reflect, but define the purpose and hope, and just cling onto those, and then hopefully surround yourself with the right people that love and care for you. And we move forward. And then from a system approach, from a health perspective, support perspective, just take a holistic approach. Just don't look at the label, don't look at the mental side of it, look at the physical, the emotional. Of course, childhood abuse, complex trauma, there are categorically horrendous physical outcomes for people which get ignored. And if you can address just one or two of those physical aspects, it actually makes the mental side of the equation a little bit easier to manage. So just take a holistic approach when you're there. And last thing, everyone, keep your headlights on.
Well, thank you. It's been a great honour to hear your story and for you to share it, and very moving. I feel very moved by what you've shared, and the same, Cathy, with you. It's an extraordinary gift for us to have been able to hear how you've navigated it and how you're still navigating it, and that it is you know, something you sound like a lifelong learner, both of you, about what it's meant to you and how you can take things forward in your own relationships, in your own work, and in your own lives. And you know, on behalf of the National Centre, thank you so much for your time. Thank you for your courage, and thank you for creating hope for those who are listening. I certainly feel more hopeful. And I would just like to say to those that are listening, you know, your feedback is welcome. We would like to hear from you about your experience of this session, and you'll be sent a survey. But I'd also like to point to the fact that our very next session actually links beautifully with what people have said today, which is about compassion and the place of compassion in the way that we approach children and people who have a lived experience and a living experience. And Paul Gilbert is going to talk with Joe Tucci, our board chair, and the CEO of the Australian Childhood Foundation, about compassion in response to those who've experienced child sexual abuse. Paul Gilbert is coming in from the UK, and so it's a bit later in the day, so he doesn't have to you know, talk to us in the middle of the night. But so that's us showing our compassion, right? But we are very much looking forward to hearing that and to building on what has been a profoundly important conversation today from Cathy and Paul. I'm sure you'll all join us in thanking them for their time today, and I would also like to thank you for coming to this session. It's not always an easy conversation to lean into, but as Cathy said, well, you know, what about living it? You know, it's a challenging conversation, but it's something that we need to all be engaged with. And the National Centre is really proud to have hosted this and to have brought Paul and Cathy together today. And again, thank you. Do you want to say anything yourselves to finish off, Cathy or Paul?
Just thank you for the opportunity. As I said, it's about normalising and having these conversations, and this is just hopefully one of many more that's going to occur. So thank you both for having me here. Thank you.
Likewise, and thanks, Leanne.